Put It on the Fridge Protocol by prongsredconvers. The thing about Peter Parker was that he talked way too much. Everybody, at least once in their lives, had told him that. Not because he was annoying, though, at least he hoped not, but mostly because he tended not to think before voicing his thoughts. Not that the things he thought were bad or something, he did actively try to be a good person and not think bad things about others. And if he thought them, he was at least smart enough not to say them out loud. No, the things Peter really did need to think about before speaking regarded his tiny tendency to embarrass himself in every way possible. No matter how serious, crucial, threatening, life or death-ish the situation was, trust Peter Benjamin Parker to find a way to make a fool of himself. He could have made a full guide out of this talent of his, diligently written following the scientific method. The level of embarrassment brought by his actions grew exponentially as the number of spectators increased, especially if they were people whose opinion he strongly cared about. Well, he was a scientist after all, and a good scientist always seeks the best results when trying to validate his theories. So, stated those facts, what could possibly be better than epically humiliating himself in front of the fucking Avengers? All things considered, it had started like a pretty decent, if not glorious day. He'd been called by Mr. Stark to help the Avengers with a little alien invasion that morning. Nothing too big. He'd fought them off, webbing them up, saving civilians while swinging right next to Iron Man. Peter didn't like to think of himself as some sort of fanboy, but yeah, he was basically a fanboy. Could you blame him, though? He still couldn't believe it sometimes, how lucky he was. He worked for Tony Stark, the Tony Stark, as his personal intern, helping him building stuff, improving the billionaire's suits as well as his own. Iron Man had always been his hero, since he was a child, and now he was up there flying over New York, sticking to the back of his armour as they fought together against some sort of weird alien species who decided to invade the Earth for God knows what reason. But what Peter really loved about it was getting to know Mr. Stark more. Yeah, Iron Man was absolutely the coolest, but Mr. Stark was even better. Not that Peter would ever say that to him. They weren't there yet. But maybe naively, he believed that someday they might reach that point. Sometimes after lab day, Mr. Stark would ask him if he wanted to stay for the night and watch a movie. He would help him out with his homework if he noticed he was stuck on some assignment, build with him his stupid science project, order a pizza with his favourite topping which he somehow remembered. He would ask him about his day at school, let him ramble for hours about the last Lego set he'd built with Ned, or the last things that had happened to Aunt May at work, or simply the last comic book he'd read. It was nice, intimate almost. Peter didn't want to think of Mr. Stark as a father figure. He wasn't that stupid. He knew his place and the boundaries set between them were very clear. Boss and intern, mentor and mentee. Maybe they were building a friendship of some sort, but Peter wasn't delusional. He liked being around him, though. That had always been his problem. He became too easily attached. He was fully aware of being clingy sometimes, which was why he never came uninvited and always kept their relationship as professional as possible. That's why he didn't call Mr. Stark by name, despite the man literally begging him to do so. "Come on, kid, I've told you 1,000,000 times. My father was Mr. Stark. Why can't you just call me Tony?" The thing was, in Peter's opinion, names had a meaning. He didn't think he was close enough to Mr. Stark to call him Tony. His friends called him that, and, well, he knew he wasn't. He knew that he didn't only keep him around because he was Spider-Man. It was clear that they enjoyed each other's company. Peter was an overthinker, yes, but he could also see things objectively. Just, he was pretty sure Mr. Stark meant to him more than he meant to the man. And it was fine that way, no need to change. He was more confident with the relationship they had. He didn't want to make things weird with Mr. Stark. He knew, deep down, that this, what they had, wasn't going to last forever. The internship would end sooner or later, with Peter either starting college or Mr. Stark retiring. Either way, he knew their bond wasn't likely to survive that. It was temporary. He was fully, painfully aware of that. Yet, that was everything he could ask for. And even if he wanted more, he was smart enough not to jeopardise it by saying something he would certainly regret. Not consciously, at least. But, well, as it had been previously stated and largely proved, Peter Parker always talked too much. Wow, today was so freaking cool, the boy exclaimed happily, letting himself fall on the couch with a satisfied sigh. I wouldn't say cool exactly, Sam muttered, still trying to get some residual alien drool off his suit. Next to him, Clint shot him a disgusted look, while Natasha smiled at him, not even trying to cover her amusement. Well, Mr. Falcon, Peter pointed out, shooting a web to grab an apple from the fruit bowl. I said cool, not cool for everyone. Clint barked out a laugh, collapsing on a chair and kicking his legs in the air as he kept cackling, gaining a glare from a very unamused Sam. Oh my god, the archer sighed after a few moments, wiping a fake tear from his eye as he dramatically pointed at Peter. You, Spidey, you're my new favourite. Hear that, Stark? Kid's got your humour. You're having a bad influence on him. Peter turned his head just in time to see Mr. Stark enter the room, immediately followed by Colonel Rhodes, who had also repeatedly asked him to call him just Rhodey as well, and that he could do, still working on it though. The man shot him a wide grin, taking off his glasses and diligently polishing them with the edge of his shirt. I'd like to take credit for that one, Barton, but I'm not doing anything. The kid's just a sassy smartass, all natural, he easily replied, a note of pride in his voice. The smile on his face had somehow turned softer too, unless Peter was imagining it, which was totally possible, and embarrassing. God, he really was a fanboy after all. Ignoring the way the compliment, was it a compliment? Never mind, it felt like one, made his cheeks blush, he started to peel the apple with the little knife Natasha handed him. That woman always had a knife with her, in the most impossible places. After their second meeting during a training session, she told him something along the line of, "What kind of woman doesn't have a knife with her?" And, well, Peter loved her. He was also terrified by her, but everybody, even remotely intelligent, would be. If people thought Iron Man or Captain America were scary, they hadn't met the Black Widow, who had also made him a crocheted beanie in Spider-Man's colours for his birthday, but that was another story entirely. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Stark added, pulling his phone out of the pocket of his jacket, swiftly writing something on it and slipping it back in. Fury just texted me that the alien thing has been taken care of for good. No civilian deaths, so that's an absolute win. Good job, everyone. Glad to know we still don't suck at our job. Especially you, Ruse, he said, a small grin pulling at his lips. You did good today. Keep it up like that and I'm afraid you'll become cooler than me someday. Peter felt the blush rise to his cheeks, carefully avoiding everyone's gaze as he focused solely on peeling his apple. He still smiled, though. Doubt it, but thanks, Dad. Now, Peter's senses were enhanced. If he concentrated really hard, he could hear not only everyone's heartbeats, but the literal blood flowing in their veins. So trust him when he said that the room was so quiet their breaths were the loudest thing he could hear. He blinked, slowly lowering the apple, unsure of what was happening. What? He asked, raising an eyebrow, searching for the others' faces. They were all staring at him, in absolute silence. Clint's mouth was slightly agape, Steve and Sam's expressions puzzled. Natasha was frowning, but with the faintest hint of a smile on her face, while Rhodey looked absolutely ecstatic. Mr. Stark, on the other hand, was frozen in place. His eyes were blown open, posture completely rigid. Peter had never thought he'd see the day Tony Stark would be left speechless. What? He repeated, now a bit concerned. Because what the fuck? Why is everyone staring at me? You just called Tony Dad, Natasha grinned, visibly enjoying the situation all too much. You said, thanks, Dad. And then the realisation kicked in. His brain, which had apparently considered it to be a too embarrassing statement, had classified him as saying the D word as some sort of trauma and removed the memory as soon as the word had left his mouth. Swear to God, Peter had no recollection of that happening, but he knew it must have had. Because he knew he thought of Mr. Stark like that sometimes. He knew how his brain worked, and he knew the primary law of the universe. Trust Peter Parker to always find a way of making a fool of himself. To put it nicely, Peter's whole world came crumbling down, along with his dignity, as he could almost certainly hear the circus jingle becoming the new soundtrack of his pathetic, and now ruined, life. He cleared his throat, desperately trying to find a way to play it cool. "No," he said quickly, too quickly, replied. "No, I didn't. I said, thanks, man." "Well done, Parker. Truly spectacular. 10 out of 10. "Do you—" Mr. Stark began, still staring at him with such intensity it was honestly creeping Peter out. "Do you see me as a father figure, Peter?" Peter couldn't quite place the tone in which he was talking, and he was probably too busy panicking to notice the way his mentor's voice had cracked ever so slightly at the word father, but he couldn't care less. He needed to find a way out of this situation. Like, immediately. "No?" he scoffed, in a desperate attempt to appear shocked by the thought. "If anything, I see you as a bother figure, because you're always bothering me." No one seemed to believe him. How surprising. Mr. Stark, however, deflated a bit, shoulders relaxing, plastering a cocky grin on his face as he looked both relieved and, well, Peter couldn't really place what the other expression was. He was too busy thinking about what to write on his gravestone. Peter Parker died of imbecility and emotional constipation. Please laugh, his death was as good of a joke as his life. Yeah, that summed it up pretty well. "Hey," Sam laughed, deepening his voice in a poor attempt of sounding serious. "Show your father some respect." God, he wanted to die. "I didn't call him Dad," Peter whined, wishing the earth took pity on him and swallowed him whole on the spot. Denial was the first stage of grief, after all. No, kid, don't worry, I take it as a compliment," Mr. Stark chuckled, shamelessly enjoying his embarrassment. Rhodey, next to him, looked like he was about to cry from holding his laughter. "It's not a big deal," Clint cut in, a too wide grin spread across his face. "Once I called Fury Dad because I was high on painkillers after my first mission. He almost shot me with his gun after I asked him for a DNA test because he kept denying the fact." "See?" Peter squeaked, vehemently gesturing toward the archer. "Clint tried to make Nick Fury adopt him. Jump on that." "Clint being an idiot? Old news," Natasha smirked, ignoring the offending glare her friend shot her. "But you calling Stark Daddy?" Peter's eyes grew impossibly wide as he felt himself burning hot. Hey, Daddy was never on the table here. For God's sake, he must have been looking like a panicked tomato. Maybe he was. "But you did call him Dad," Steve unhelpfully supplied. "In America, Rogers, sir, please, you've been nothing but silent since this whole thing started, and I'd appreciate it greatly if it stayed that way." The boy groaned in exasperation. "And for the record, I didn't call him that." Mr. Stark snorted, shaking his head and lazily waving his hand around. "Don't worry, Pete, I believe you." Peter let out a sigh of relief. "Son," the billionaire added, a mischievous glint in his eyes as he slipped his glasses back on his nose. Peter hated himself for the way hearing that word, despite everything, made him feel all warm inside. Was he really that desperate? "Do you want to talk about it later in the lab while I give a look at those web shooters of yours? Then we could play a game of catch," the man mused, still smiling as he gestured Rhodey to follow him down the corridor. "I'd really like that," Peter thought, physically biting his tongue to stop him from making the situation even worse. Yeah, he really was that desperate. "Well, this was fun, children, but I gotta go talk to Barton's father." Clint flipped him off as everyone else laughed, momentarily forgetting about Peter's previous unrequited fatherhood situation, much to the boy's relief. Mr. Stark shot him one last look, giving him a warm smile. Peter had grown used to that smile. It wasn't the 32-teeth grin he wore in front of other people, journalists, businessmen, sometimes even his own team, but it was something he reserved for his special people. At least, Peter believed so. He'd only seen Mr. Stark smile like that at Miss Potts, or Rhodey, or Happy. He smiled at him like that too. He liked it better. Much, much better. It was familiar. He'd never thought, not even in a million years, that he could have reached the point where something about Tony Stark, Iron Man, his hero, genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, looked familiar. And yet, there he was. "See you later in the lab, kiddo." After that, the two men disappeared inside the elevator. And Peter, before anyone else could say another word, Peter jumped off his seat on the couch, grabbing his phone and flying down the corridor, running non-stop until he reached his room. He locked himself in, pulling out the phone and quickly scrolling his contacts, falling face first on the mattress as he selected Ned's number with a groan. In the living room, on a small glass table near the couch, the apple remained untouched. Wow, dude, you have a crazy life," Ned finally managed to say through the phone, after uselessly trying to talk between the wheezing and the laughter. "So, let me recap. Tony Stark complimented you and you called him Dad." Peter ignored the way his friend snorted at the word. "And then you ran away from the literal Avengers and locked yourself in your room. You know you have to get out of there, right? You can't hide forever." "Says who?" Peter groaned, burying his face in the pillow. "I just want to die. Disappear. I don't know, erase me from existence or something." Ned chuckled, a muffled sound coming from the phone as he plopped on the bed. "Pete, maybe you're taking this a bit too seriously. I mean, yeah, it's hella embarrassing and I'm loving every second of it, but it's not the end of the world." Peter lifted his head, putting the phone on speaker as he rolled on his back, facing the ceiling. "But what if it is?" he murmured, suddenly feeling anxiety crawl up in his chest. Ned's voice softened at the other end. "Peter," he reasoned calmly, likely well aware of Peter's currently panicked brain activity. "Mr. Stark won't ditch you, you know. You haven't ruined anything, if that's what you're wondering." Peter groaned, hating the way his best friend always seemed to know what was going on in his mind. Sure, it was helpful, especially given his practically non-existent ability to voice his feelings. Still, he knew how nonsense his overthinking was, but hearing it out loud, it both made it seem very real and very stupid at the same time. "You can't know that," Peter found himself whispering. Ned was silent for a second. "Okay," he said carefully. "What makes you think that there's even a possibility that he'll do what you're thinking he'll do? Did he seem mad after you called him?" "Don't say it!" "That," the other boy finished with a sigh. Did he look upset?" Peter thought about it, trying to picture the man's face, the way his eyes had widened, the way he'd stiffened all of a sudden. "No," he answered, blowing out a breath. "He didn't look mad. I don't think he was. He was like, I don't know, surprised. Really, really surprised. But he recovered pretty fast and started to make fun of me with the others. God, that was so embarrassing. Mr. Rhodey wouldn't stop smiling." Ned hummed, clicking his tongue. "See? No reason to think something's wrong. You even said he asked you to go to the lab later. Why do you think he'll see you any differently?" "Because," Peter whined, struggling to express himself in a comprehensible way. "He's Tony Stark, Ned, that's why." He didn't know how to explain it better than that. He had called Tony Stark Dad. It might seem like something stupid for somebody else, but for Peter it was huge. It was deeper than that. "I get it, dude," Ned answered sympathetically. "He's been your hero since forever, and now you literally work with him. It can be a little overwhelming to spend so much time with your idol. I mean, you literally worship the ground he walked on. But it's okay to have a slip-up. No one's going to crucify you for that. He knows you didn't mean it that way." Peter bit his lip. That was the problem. He did mean that. "It's not that," he managed. "It's, at first I did worship everything about him. I had all the posters, I watched all the interviews, I even cosplayed him at a couple of events and went to one of his expos. The thing is, I don't anymore. Well, sometimes yeah, kinda, but it's different. I still can't believe I get to meet the Avengers, but with Mr. Stark it's something else." He sighed, nervously scrubbing his shirt. "Sometimes it blows my mind when I think, oh my god, I'm in Tony Stark's lab. But then Mr. Stark enters with 2 milkshakes and pizza leftovers, and we work together for a while, and he asks me about my day and lets me take everything I need to build my stupid little robots or to fix my computer. And I feel like I kind of know him at this point, He's not really like the media picture him. He's actually a human disaster. If it weren't for Miss Potts, he'd always be locked in the lab. I mean, he's got the whole I am Iron Man scary part when he wants, but otherwise he's barely a functioning adult. He always forgets to tie his shoes and trips all over the place. He drinks way too much coffee and always wears the same old t-shirt from MIT, even though he owns literally hundreds of clothes. Peter swallowed, internally cringing at himself for how clingy that he sounded. What scares me is not that he's Tony Stark, but that he's not anymore. To me, now he's just Mr. Stark. Yesterday, I literally sent him a cat meme. You don't go back from that. From the other end of the call, Ned breathed in awe. That is so awesome, man. You know that. Peter chuckled, shaking his head. That's exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't have this effect on me, not anymore. It's different. I actually like him, Ned. I think I'm getting a bit too attached. And that word, it didn't just slip, he confessed, a voice barely above a whisper. Ned cleared his throat. Peter fidgeted with the lace of his hoodie, staring blankly at the ceiling. Pete, his best friend began. You know there's nothing bad with caring for someone, right? Mr. Stark cares about you too. Surely you know that. And if you see him as more than a mentor, there's nothing wrong with that either. You're allowed to hang out with him outside the lab if that's what you want. From what I understand, the man could really use some time off work, and you like spending time with him. Maybe it's not a bad thing, this stuff that's happened. Maybe you could talk about it and, letting him know you care more than he thinks. Peter shifted on the blanket, sitting upright as he held his phone closer, tucking his legs against his chest. You think it'll work? He asked, hating how pathetic he sounded. I mean, what if he was cool with it just because he thought I didn't mean it? What if I tell him that I meant it and he freaks out? Weren't you panicking about the same thing, 5 minutes ago? Peter nodded. Then he remembered that Ned couldn't have possibly seen him doing that. He cleared his throat. Yeah, guess so. Yep, you were totally freaking out, his friend repeated. But you were because you cared. What if he cares too, and you two are just pretending to believe that the other believes that you are pretending to believe? Peter blinked, trying to digest the last bit. After repeating the sentence a couple of times, he decided that it made enough sense. You really think I should talk to him? Ned hummed vigorously on the phone, most likely smiling. Peter smiled too. God, he loved his best friend. Okay, I'll do it. I should get going anyway. It's almost lab time. He sighed, mentally preparing himself for what had the potential to be one of the most embarrassing conversations he'd ever had. Thanks, man. I don't know what I'd do without you. Guy in the chair, dude. Guy in the chair. Always ready to, do whatever guy in the chairs do. Peter let out a chuckle, tapping his phone open to check the time. I'll go then. Thanks again, Ned. I'll call you later. Pray for me, man. Ned laughed in his ear as he wished him good luck. Then Peter pressed, end call. Well, he'd done worse things than having an open-hearted conversation with someone, after all. He threw his legs off the bed, slipping his shoes in. With a sigh, he reached the handle, opening the door and immediately closing it behind him, resisting the temptation to crawl back under the sheets. He quickly pulled his phone off his pocket, sending a quick text to MJ. Do you think it'd be weird if I hypothetically told an adult that is supposedly my mentor that I like their company and kinda see them as a parental figure, but not in a hey wanna adopt me way, but more like a hey I'd like us to hang out sometimes and be a bit closer way? No, wait, it's creepy said like that. Forget the parental figure thing. Do I sound desperate? Would it be stupid? I have attachment issues, don't I? Please send help. The girl answered within seconds. You've done something stupid, now you regret it and you're overthinking it. It wasn't a question. Not that MJ asked rhetorical questions. Usually, she already knew the answer anyway. Stark loves you, don't be an idiot. Just have a decent talk and stop stressing yourself. Men are really shit about talking about feelings. Kinda pathetic if you ask me. But you care and he cares too. Just sort it out. A pause. Peter stared at the screen, eyes glued to the words, Stark loves you. MJ was never wrong about those things, was she? The typing dots reappeared. Then, It'll be fine, loser. And you don't sound desperate. I think it's nice. But just FYI, you do have attachment issues. Smiling down at the screen, he typed back a smiley face before slipping his phone back into his jeans. Feeling a bit lighter than before, Peter headed towards the lab. You're not going to talk about it, are you? Rhodey questioned, though they both knew it wasn't really a problem. He knew Tony too well, and he probably already knew everything that was crossing the genius's mind in that moment, which Tony had to admit was both very cute and very scary. About what, honey bear? He wondered, slipping off his jacket and throwing it on the nearest chair. Rhodey sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Tony. Tony sat on the floor, legs crossed and back pressed against the wall. He didn't like it when Rhodey said his name like that. It meant he was serious, and that he was likely in trouble, or that he would be about to be forced to talk about his feelings. And honestly, he didn't know which was worse. Don't Tony me, he answered, taking off his glasses and rubbing a hand on his face. I know what you want me to talk about, but there's nothing to say because nothing happened. Rhodey eyed him sceptically, raising an eyebrow. Nothing happened, huh? Then how come you look like you were about to faint when the kid called you dad? Okay, well, not that he was actually about to faint, but his heart might have skipped a couple beats. Tony blew out a breath, letting himself slide on the floor, ending up in an awkward position with his neck tilted in a weird angle. The kid had, in fact, called him Dad, and Tony's brain had completely short-circuited for the next 2 minutes or so. But then he'd said he didn't mean it, that it had just slipped out. It wasn't that deep. So, obviously, Tony had done the only thing he was good at, make fun of serious situations as a coping mechanism to compensate his poor emotional skills. The thing was, the kid had looked so miserable after that, like he wanted the ground to collapse and eat him whole, like he regretted saying that. And don't misunderstand him, Tony was glad Peter had simply just misspoken. But maybe he wasn't that glad, not completely. Disappointment, that's the word he was looking for. He was disappointed that Peter had said it was a mistake. Of course he did, of course it was a mistake. He was just his mentor, not his dad. How could Tony Stark be considered a dad? He was the most irresponsible adult in the history of irresponsible adults, and he was far from being a role model. Iron Man, responsible hero, role model, spot on. Tony Stark, merchant of death, spoiled, egocentric, narcissistic. He was barely suited to be a mentor, and God knows how he had managed not to screw that up already. But a parental figure, him, the mere thought was laughable. Iron Man, yes. Tony Stark, not recommended. Tones, Rhodey called softly, crouching down next to him. Tony looked up, his eyes leaving the spot on the wall where they'd been burning holes into. Care to tell me what's on your mind? Tony shrugged, sinking even more on the floor. He was pathetic. What's there to say? He croaked out, not even bothering to hide his defeated expression. He'd never been fully able to lie to Rhodey and Pepper, so what was the point in even trying? The kid called my dad, I freaked out. He said he didn't mean it, and now here we are. Rhodey shook his head, squeezing his shoulder. That's not it, and you know. It's okay to be, disappointed. Tony stiffened. I'm not. Yeah, sure, Tones, sure. I'm not, he repeated, meeting Rhodey's blank expression. How long have we known each other? The man asked, his voice softer than before. Tony bit his lip, rolling his eyes. About 30 years. 31 this year, Rhodey corrected. Oh, you're keeping count, Platypus, I'm touched. Shut up and let me get to the point. You can't lie to me nor Pepper, I think we've established that plenty of times. The only person you're lying to is yourself, and you don't believe your lies either. Should I be offended? Are you calling me a shitty liar? Rhodey sighed for what must have been the 100th time that morning. No, Tony, the problem is that sometimes you're too good of a liar. But right now, the point is, there's nothing wrong in admitting that you're sad that Peter said it was a mistake. But why would I? Because, Rhodey interrupted him, already knowing what he was about to say. You care about him, Tones, and that's a good thing. You keep distancing yourself, you never hug him. You hardly ruffle his hair or give him a pat on the shoulder. Try to just be a mentor, but you can't do that at all. You literally have a file with all his favourite food memorised, including his favourite milkshake flavour. And I've seen you two together. I've seen how proud you are every time he comes up with a good idea. You may not use your words, but he knows that you care, and he cares about you too. Tony swallowed thickly, hating how he was feeling in that moment. Inadequate, insecure, scared, you pick one. You think? Rhodey looked at him, staring in silence for a few seconds. You don't think the kid comes here just because you're Iron Man, right? Tony lowered his gaze. Rhodey dropped his head, pinching his nose once more. Oh God, you really do think that? Oh my God, my best friend is an idiot. Hey! It's true, Tony, you are. For fuck's sake, you're literally both the smartest and the stupidest person I know. How can you think that? The kid literally loves you. No, forget it, he adores you. Don't you see how happy he is every time he walks in? He tells you about school stuff and about his friends. He wouldn't do that if he didn't like talking to you. He'd just work in silence or something. And he texts you asking about random stuff and makes sure you ate something, which I'm immensely grateful for. Tony, he likes you. Rhodey took a breath, measuring his words. Tony, on the other hand, was still overthinking the he likes you part. Listen, man, his best friend said, squeezing his shoulder a little. I know you don't think that people like you, but they do. I do, Pepper does, and Happy and Peter too. We like you, okay? And you not believing it won't make it any less true. He pursed his lips, a sad shadow crossing his face. Have you ever considered that maybe people like you because they get to know you? Not because you're Tony Stark, but just because you're Tony? Allowing people to get close to you isn't going to make them go away, you know. It might as well give them a better reason to stay. Tony did his best not to sniffle, not missing the way Rhodey's expression crumbled as soon as he realised his friend was actually about to cry. Let me tell you something. Don't freak out. Not helping, Tony muttered, wiping his face with his sleeve. But I don't think Peter misspoke back there. I think he thought something and said it out loud, and he regretted it, not because he didn't mean it, but because he was scared of your reaction and was just embarrassed. Rhodey shifted position, now facing Tony, who was still stubbornly staring at his knees. I think that he sees you as more than just a mentor, just like you see him as more than just an intern. You're both just too emotionally constipated to admit it, which makes you even more alike than you think. But I'm not his father. Tony's voice was barely a whisper. He was not Peter's father. He couldn't be. He wasn't. He didn't even know if he wanted to. Being someone's father figure was something big. It meant responsibility. It meant attention. It meant being everything Tony wasn't. He wasn't about to ruin the kid's life, because even if Peter saw him as some sort of parental figure, well, that was because he didn't know him. No, you're not his father, Rhodey agreed, much to Tony's surprise. He lifted his head, well aware of how ridiculously scared he must have been looking. The other man smiled, slowly shaking his head. You're not Peter's father, he repeated. But it doesn't mean you can't have a big part in his life anyway. You could be more than just his mentor, you could be his friend too. Watch movies together, teach him something cool outside the Spider-Man stuff. Do everything you would have liked to do when you were his age. That's the problem, Tony admitted quietly. I don't know what I would like to do at his age. I just know what I didn't want to do. Who I don't want to be, he thought miserably, careful not to voice it aloud. Rhodey pursed his lip, a glint of understanding sparkling in his eyes. Who was Jarvis to you? Tony froze at the name, his chest suddenly tight with a wave of grief, still fresh from the Ultron incident, when the last thing he had of Jarvis had been ripped away from him, and that, too, had been his fault. He was my best friend, he whispered, not meeting Rhodey's eyes. He felt the man nod beside him, slowly pulling him into a side hug. And yet, he wasn't your father, nor did you consider him so. Or, if you did, you knew he wasn't. You just needed someone to fill that void you had, someone you felt safe with, who listened to you and helped you feel less lonely. He paused, slightly tightening the hug. Someone who made you feel loved, right? Tony nodded, wordlessly resting his head on his friend's shoulder. Was he really Peter's Jarvis? Did the kid really see him that way? What I'm trying to say, Rhodey went on, with the same soft hedge in his voice he used when he talked to Tony in the middle of the night in their college's bedroom, distracting him from the nightmares after his parents had passed away, is that the kid loves you, and you clearly love him too. You find comfort in each other, and that's an amazing thing. And being scared of being bad for him, while being understandable, is still fucking stupid. Listen, you're good for him, Tones. The fact that you worry so much is proof that you're a better father than yours was. You're trying so hard to help him with Spider-Man, to keep him safe, to make his life easier. Just try to let Peter Parker in too. He's a good kid. Tony sighed, his lips curling up in a small smile. The best. Rhodey smiled back at him, squeezing his shoulder once more, then freeing him from the hug and standing up, wiping his jacket. Promise you'll talk to him. Tony's smile dropped, soon replaced by a pleading look. What if I just acted, no need to talk, actions speak louder than words and all that. Promise you'll talk. But, no buts, promise. But, nuh-uh. Rhodey. Promise. Honey, drop the pet names and promise. James. Anthony. Tony sighed, exasperated, throwing his hands as he pushed himself up, scowling at Rhodey. The man simply stared back at him, an innocent smile plastered on his lips. Fine, I promise, I'll talk to the kid. Rhodey shot him a full 32-teeth smile as he patted his back. Good boy, I love it when you're emotionally mature. I hate it when you force me to be. Part of a best friend's job description. You love me dearly, don't lie. Tony softened, rolling his eyes in a fake annoyance. Yeah, sure, keep being delusional. Rhodey stuck his tongue at him, waving him goodbye as he headed outside the lab. Just as he pushed the button to open the doors, a very nervous-looking Peter Parker strolled inside, greeting the man with a blush and a quick salute. Rhodey turned back, meeting Tony's eyes, and sending him the most obvious and unsubtle wink ever winked in the history of winks. Tony flipped him off, gesturing him to go away, only to be met with his friend's laughter. The kid watched the man leaving, a puzzled look depicted across his face. Then he gave Tony an awkward smile before heading to his desk. Well, thought Tony, mentally cursing himself, this is going to be fun. If there was one thing Tony Stark hated more than anything, and trust him, the list was pretty long, it was silence. He couldn't remember a time in his life where he'd actually felt comfortable in silence. He hated it, despised it with every fibre of his being. His thoughts were always too loud. He felt like he could hear people staring at him, could hear their thoughts, could imagine what they were thinking. And they were never nice things. He could remember how quiet his house was. No one was allowed to speak with it when his father was working. Howard needed absolute silence to focus, and he would be annoyed out of his mind whenever Tony entered the lab, blabbering about whatever 7-year-olds blabber about. Nope, Tony definitely didn't like silence. Truth be told, his total inability to work without music was one of the few things he actually liked about himself. It reminded him that he was different. That's why he always had some incredibly loud music blasted full volume in his lab if he was alone, or he was always chattering or laughing or making noise in any way possible. Pepper always told him he was allergic to silence. In retrospect, she hadn't been wrong exactly. So it's easy to understand how Tony was slowly losing his mind with the kid working right next to him without making a single sound. He'd been quiet for almost an hour, not even a sneeze, a cough, nothing. Even his breathing seemed to have quieted down. One of the many reasons why Tony loved working with the kid was his talking non-stop. Normally the kid couldn't shut up to save his own life, always rambling about everything that had happened in his weirdly unusual teenage/free-time vigilante life. And despite Tony making fun of him for being the most talkative person on the planet, the man truly did love those little chatters and had sworn himself that he would never, for absolutely no reason, tell the kid to shut up. But now Peter had been working on the same web shooter for about 40 minutes, tightening and untightening the same screw over and over again. So yeah, Tony was about to lose his mind. He took a deep breath, having had enough of the awkwardness literally crawling under his skin, thickening the air and making it literally impossible for him to focus without him going insane. His ears were whistling, his head exploding with how loud his thoughts were. It really wasn't helping with the anxiety. "So, kid," he began, pointedly not looking at Peter. "Mr. Stark, I think I need to tell you something," the boy blurted out at the same time, his face becoming bright red as soon as he'd realised he'd interrupted him. Tony internally let out a sigh of relief, thanking the universe for not being the one who had to start the conversation. Way to be the responsible one. "Go on, kiddo, I'm all ears." But Peter didn't go on. He just stared at his newly disassembled web shooter, fidgeting with the screwdriver. "Do you, Tony cleared his throat, cursing himself for his evident lack of words. It was hard to believe he was the same man who held conferences in front of thousands of people since he was 15. "Do you want to move on to the couch to, talk?" Peter quickly shook his head, looking mildly alarmed at the idea. "Nope, too serious." Tony snorted, gaining a small smile from the kid. "Thank God you said that, my hands were already sweating." Peter's smile dropped, the same nervous expression he'd worn as he'd entered, now back on his face. "Listen, Mr. Stark, about this afternoon." Tony opened his mouth almost on reflex, ready to say something along the "Don't worry about it, kid, forget it was just an accident" line, to dismiss the matter as soon as possible. But then he closed it, biting his tongue to prevent him from saying something stupid like that. That would only make it worse for the kid, who was already evidently struggling. And he was supposed to be the adult here. Well, that kind of proved his point. He could almost see Rhodey's disappointed face fluctuate in front of him. Good, he was also hallucinating now. Peter didn't seem to notice his almost interruption, too busy trying to find the words. He went on, still not lifting his eyes from the dismantled project in front of him. "I guess I wanted to apologise for what happened, before, you know." He cleared his throat, his uneasiness painfully evident on every inch of his body. "It's just, I'm sorry I made it awkward for you. I know you weren't exactly looking forward to hear something like that. And again, I'm sorry I embarrassed you in front of the Avengers." "Wait, what?" "But I just need to tell you that I really did mean it," the kid rushed out, speaking so fast Tony barely caught what he was saying. "I mean, I didn't mean to say it, but I kinda meant it, a little. Not that I think you're my dad, because it'd be stupid, but like..." "Kid." Tony gently tried to interrupt him, noticing with slight concern how Peter wasn't even breathing between a sentence and the other. I would like to spend more time with you, like, not for Spider-Man stuff. Although I'm very grateful you're helping me with that, sir. It's just, like, I'd like to hang out. I don't know, going out for ice cream, building Lego sets. We could build the Iron Man suit, and just that, I guess." "Peter," Tony tried again, feeling his throat dangerously near to closing up. "Please, Mr. Stark, let me finish," the kid implored, squeezing the life out of his poor screwdriver. "It's okay if you don't want to do that, as you said we're not there yet, but I really need to say all of this because I don't hear enough people telling you that they appreciate spending time with you outside of work, and I know that being a 15-year-old isn't the best you could ask for, but I'd like that. Yep." Tony sucked in a breath, biting his cheeks in a poor attempt to stop his lower lip from trembling. He wasn't going to cry. He was not. He was an adult in control of his emotions, perfectly capable of handling a heart-to-heart conversation with a teenager without breaking down. "I don't hear enough people telling you that they appreciate spending time with you." Tony rubbed a hand on his face, trying to discreetly wipe his eyes, which were only slightly moist, by the way. No tears. Not yet. The thing is, with Peter, was that he never lied. Okay, correction. He never lied about stuff like that. He lied about being injured because he was an idiot. He lied about not being tired because he was a bit too much like Tony after all. But he never lied about what he thought of the people around him. And, well, he'd be lying if he said that knowing for a fact that the kid meant every single word had left him pretty shaken. "Mrs. Stark?" Peter's tentative voice pulled him back from his thoughts. Tony mentally cursed himself for not answering the kid straight away as he lifted his gaze, meeting Peter's eyes. He was met with an uncertain smile, anxiety clearly written all over the kid's face. Tony sighed, smiling back as warmly as possible. "First of all, kiddo," he began, finding imperative to clarify something once and for all. "You can never, and I mean never, embarrass me, okay? I'm the embarrassing one. I'm the guy who does dumb shit all the time. So you don't think, even for a second, that you could embarrass me in front of the Avengers or the President or God themselves. Got it?" Peter nodded, dumbstruck. Tony noticed, relieved, that his smile seemed to be a little less stretched, a bit more genuine. "Good," he continued, swallowing the knot in his throat. "Now, about all the things you said. Same, kid, same. I'm not good with this kind of talking. I think you know it better than me at this point. But I like spending time with you too." He took a deep breath, hating himself for how hard it was to just get a couple words out. Was he really that shitty at talking about feelings? The answer was probably yes. "Look, kiddo, I really care about you. Not just because you're Spider-Man. I really hope you know that. You really do make my days better. I look forward to Wednesdays and Fridays just because I get to hang out with you. And I know I don't say it nearly as often as I should, but I'm proud of you, kid. And again, not because you're Spider-Man. I mean, also because of that, but not just that. I'm proud of you because you're Peter, and I genuinely think you're one of the best people I've ever met. When I meant that I wanted you to be better than me, I hadn't realised you already were." Now Tony wasn't the only one who looked like he was about to cry. Peter was staring at him, eyes wide open, mouth slightly agape, his face almost as red as the glove he was trying to attach his web shooter to. Seeing the kid look so surprised, shocked even, by what he'd just said, made his heart sink, a wave of shame hitting him full force. Had he really been so cold that Peter looked like he was about to cry just because he'd told him he was proud of him? Was he really that bad of a mentor? "You're turning out just like him. You're no different." Tony let out a shaky breath, eyes locked to the keyboard in front of him. He couldn't even hold the kid's gaze. He was a coward, nothing more, nothing less. "Look, Pete," he sighed. "I didn't have a great example growing up, but that's no excuse. I'm sorry I never told you that I liked you." He never told me he loved me, never even told me he liked me. I thought that, showing it through actions was enough, but it's not always like that. Some stuff needs to be said out loud, and I know I'm not the best at it. Sorry you're stuck with me, kid. He huffed a chuckle, cringing at how self-depreciating it sounded, even to his own ears. But I promise I'll try to do better, break the cycle of shame and all. Next to him, Peter was silent. Tony began to chew the inside of his cheek, desperately wishing Pepper was here. She knew what to say. She always knew what to say. That's part of why he'd made her CEO. She was by far one of the brightest people he'd ever met, and from her he'd learned something his father had never seemed to be capable of understanding. Being able to solve the hardest equation on Earth is useless if you have no one to share your goal with. But Pepper was not there, and neither was Rhodey, so he was stuck with himself. Hooray for him. "Thank you." Tony's head snapped up so fast he almost cricked his neck. "What?" "I said thank you, Mr. Stark," Peter repeated, offering him a wobbly smile. "What you said was very nice. Like, more than nice. One of the nicest things I've been told, to be honest." "No problem, kiddo," he replied quickly. "Nothing you don't deserve." "But, Mr. Stark," Peter carried on, seemingly ignoring his last comment, "you should really give yourself more credit. I mean, I've always known you liked me," which sounds really freaking dumb and pretentious said out loud, but yeah. Even if you never said it, you've never failed to show me, and let me tell you, sir, only an idiot wouldn't notice everything you do for the people you care about. I never doubted that you liked me, it was just, I thought I liked you more than you liked me, that's all. But hearing it was, honestly, it was all I wanted to hear, so thank you." The boy bit his lip, hesitating. "And for the record," he added, quieter this time, "I'm not just stuck with you," he repeated, air-quoting with his fingers what the man had just said. "But I'm choosing to be here. I'll be for as long as you want me here. You're way better than you let yourself give credit for, Mr. Stark. For someone whose ego is said to be bigger than Jupiter, you have a pretty shitty self-esteem." Tony actually laughed at that, gaining a more confident smile from Peter, who was now looking at him with a deciphering expression in his eyes. "And I don't just like to be here because it's Iron Man's lab. which, don't misunderstand me, it is cool as hell, and I still can't believe it myself sometimes. But I like Mr. Stark better than Iron Man anyway. He's funnier to hang out with. He shrugged, flashing him a lopsided grin. I like Mr. Stark better than Iron Man anyway. Yeah, Tony was definitely going to cry. Come here, kid, he croaked out, feeling his throat dangerously near to close up. Peter's face instantly lit up with an ear-to-ear smile as he climbed over the table, launching himself into Tony's awkwardly open arms, colliding with the man's chest and squeezing out what little air had managed to enter his lungs with all the breaths he'd been holding. Tony tentatively hugged him back, some of the tension leaving his body as he felt the kid shove his face into his shoulder. He closed his eyes for a second, for the first time since Afghanistan, not minding having something pressed against his chest. This is nice, he thought, finding himself genuinely smiling. God, that kid. There was no way he'd ever say that out loud, but he was sure that he'd die on the spot for that little ball of energy that was currently curled up against him. After a while, he gently broke the hug, affectionately squeezing the kid's shoulder. Now that we're definitely there, though, you kind of have to call me Tony. I didn't have this whole feeling thing happen just for you to keep calling me Mr. Stark. Peter's bewildered expression was probably the most comical Tony had ever seen. The kid looked shocked, outraged, confused, and panicked all at the same time. But, "Nuh-uh, Spider-Boy," he hushed him. "Now that we've established that we're basically buddies, the first name is the bare minimum. Mr. Stark was my father. Please just call me Tony." A shadow crossed Peter's eyes. "Does it bother you?" he asked uncertainly. "That I call you Mr. Stark?" Tony's face softened as he reached out to ruffle the boy's hair. "No, it doesn't," he answered honestly. "I mean, not in a bad way. Actually, you kind of made me like being called that. I had something new, something good to associate the name to." He didn't miss the way Peter's smile grew even bigger at the confession. "But yeah, makes me feel old." The kid scrunched up his face. "But you are!" Tony gasped dramatically, a hand flying to his heart. "I'm not." "Mr. Stark, you're 46. "Which still makes me young and juvenile, and it's Tony." "Whatever, old man." "You're a little shit, you know that, right?" Peter shrugged. "So I've been told, yeah." Tony laughed, sliding an arm around the kid's shoulders, pulling him into a side hug. "So, Underoos, want me to give you a hand with that web shooter over there?" Peter frowned for a second, then shook his head with a small smile tugging at his lips. "How do you feel about ice cream?" He rolled his eyes, grabbing his jacket as he wordlessly headed outside the lab. "Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you," Peter yelled delightedly, bouncing around like a spring toy. Tony smiled fondly, feeling lighter than he'd felt in months. Bless the kid in his excitement. "You can bring those friends of yours too, Ted and Scary Girl. Tell them I'll pick them up in 20. The kid's eyes grew impossibly huge. He looked like he was scarily close to exploding like a firework. He was so focused on not screaming that he didn't even bother to correct Tony with their names. Peter made to run for the garage, but then he stopped abruptly. Tony didn't have the time to ask him if something was wrong that the kid turned around, sprinting full speed towards the man, pulling him into one more rib-cracking hug. "Thanks, Tony, you're the best." Tony froze for a second, barely registering the use of his first name. Then he grinned, squeezing Peter just as tightly, before lightly slapping the back of his head. "Come on, Underoos, we don't have all day." It must be true, what they say, that the greatest happiness has to be researched in the smallest of things. Because right there, half running after his kid in the middle of the corridor, Tony was positive that Peter's laugh in that moment would forever be one of his happiest memories ever. From the top of the ceiling, Friday silently saved the video recording from the security camera roll in a special folder, along with the other video files of the day, following the "put it on the fridge" protocol. Thanks for listening. I really hope you enjoyed. Have a lovely rest of your day.